You remembered.
There are things Mina Adeyemi knows for certain. She knows the smell of rain before it falls on the Busan coast, salt and iron, and the particular loneliness of a city that belongs to the sea. She knows how to read a pulse with two fingers pressed to the wrist of a stranger and know, without looking at a machine, whether that stranger intends to live. She knows how to hold a dying man's hand and lie to him in a language his bones understand. To say you are safe, you are going to be fine, even when everything beneath her palms says otherwise. These are the certainties she has built her life on, hard and practical and useful. She has never wasted a day on things she cannot be certain of. If you are watching this video, comment your country and subscribe. That was before the night the sea gave her Hajun Kwan. It was the third week of December, and Busan was cold in the way that feels personal, the kind of cold that finds the gaps in your coat and presses itself against your skin like a punishment. Mina had just finished a double shift at Busan Central Hospital, 12 hours in the cardiology ward with barely 20 minutes for a meal that was only a meal in the technical sense of the word. A triangle of kimbap and a paper cup of instant coffee that had gone lukewarm by the time she remembered it. She was 29 years old. For years into a working visa, she had fought for with every academic certificate her family back in Ibadan could help her frame, and she was tired in the particular way of someone who has been strong for too long without permission to stop. She was walking the Houndy Beach Road instead of taking the bus. She did this some nights when the ward had been too loud, too full of people fighting their bodies and losing. The beach at midnight was the opposite of the hospital, wide and dark and mercifully indifferent to human suffering. She had her headphones in, but no music playing. Just the wind. Just the sound of herself breathing. She almost missed him. He was below the seawall, half submerged on the rocks where the water's edge came in and retreated in cold, rhythmic indifference. She saw him because she always saw things that needed seeing. Her mother had called it the gift of the attentive heart, the quality that made some people healers and others merely bystanders in the same emergency. One moment she was walking, and the next she had already stopped, already pulled out her headphones, already leaning over the railing with her eyes sharpened into something that was not curiosity but closer to recognition. A shape that was wrong. A stillness that was worse than wrong. She was down the steps before she had consciously decided to move. He was face up, which was the only reason he was still alive. The rocks had caught him at an angle that kept his mouth above the reaching water. He was dressed expensively, or had been, before whatever had happened to him happened. Dark trousers, a shirt that had once been crisp and was now plastered to his chest like a second skin by the sea. He was Korean, broad-shouldered, with a face that would have been striking in any context, and was, even in this one, arresting in the way of things built with intention. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was that his lips were turning blue at the edges, that his skin was the color of cold marble, that when she pressed two fingers to the side of his neck his pulse was there, but thin as thread. "Hey," she said in Korean, sharp and clear. "Hey, open your eyes." Nothing. She checked his airway. She ran her hands quickly and professionally over his head, his neck, his torso, and found what she found. Two things that made her stomach drop. The first was a wound on his left side, below the ribs, already dressed with what appeared to be a field bandage that someone with real skill had applied, and that was now soaked through and losing the fight. The second was the cold. He had been in or near that water long enough for hypothermia to have moved from threat to fact. She called emergency services. She stripped off her coat and put it over him. She positioned herself behind his head, tilting it, maintaining his airway, pressing her hands to his face and his neck in a way that was designed not to comfort him but to give back heat, to lend him the warmth her body had spent all day accumulating through corridors and under fluorescent lights. While she waited for the ambulance, she talked to him, which was something she had learned to do not from any textbook, but from her grandmother in Ibadan, who had said, "The soul does not leave silently. If it hears something it wants to stay for, it will wait." "Oya," Mina said quietly, in the voice she used when she meant business and not ceremony. "You are not going to die on this beach. I don't have time for that. Stay." He did not open his eyes. But somewhere in the machinery of his chest, something shifted. His next breath was fractionally deeper. Mina noticed, because she noticed everything. The paramedics arrived in 6 minutes. They tried to take over completely, and she let them take the physical work, but she kept one hand on his wrist, on that thread-thin pulse, because she had decided somewhere in those 6 minutes that this man was her responsibility now. which was irrational, and she knew it, and she did it anyway. At the hospital, she was the one who pulled rank. She was on staff. She knew the night team. She knew what this man needed, and she stood at the edge of the trauma bay and gave information clearly and precisely until the attending physician looked at her the way physicians looked at nurses who knew too much and said, "Are you family?" "I'm the one who kept him alive," Mina said. "So right now, yes." She stayed until he was stable. She stayed until his temperature had come up 3 degrees and the wound in his side had been assessed, deep, surgical-looking in its precision, the kind of wound that told its own story about the world this man moved in, and cleaned and properly dressed. She stayed until his pulse had moved from thread to something more like a rope. And then she went and sat in a plastic chair in the corridor outside his room and fell asleep with her elbows on her knees and her head in her hands. She woke up to someone standing over her. "You are the one who found him." The man speaking was perhaps 60, compact and immaculate in a dark suit that had no business being worn at 4 in the morning. He was looking at her with an expression that was not exactly gratitude and not exactly threat. It was the look of a man doing a rapid calculation. "I'm a nurse," Mina said, which was not an answer to his question, but was the only thing she trusted herself to say while half asleep. "I know what you are." He said it without inflection. "I am asking what you want." Mina looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "I want to go home and sleep." Something moved in his face. "Fractional. That is all. That is all." He stared at her a moment longer, as if she were a text in a language he had spent decades being fluent in and had suddenly found a word he did not recognize. Then he inclined his head, the smallest possible bow, and said, "The Kwan family thanks you." She was almost at the exit before the name landed properly in her mind, and she stopped walking. She had been in Busan 4 years. You did not live in Busan for 4 years without learning certain names the way you learned to read the weather. Not because you sought the knowledge, but because the knowledge was in the air, in the way people spoke in lowered voices, in the way certain restaurants suddenly became unavailable and certain dockside neighborhoods went quiet. The Kwan family. She stood at the hospital exit in the gray pre-dawn and felt something cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. Then she went home, because she was a woman of practical certainties, and there was nothing to be done about a name at 4 in the morning. She did not expect to see him again. He came to the hospital 4 days later, which was 3 days earlier than any physician would have sanctioned for a man who had been admitted with hypothermia and a wound that had required 14 internal stitches. He was not a patient anymore, or rather he had clearly decided he was not a patient anymore in the way that men like him decided things, completely and without consultation. He was wearing black, standing in the corridor outside the cardiology ward where she was due to start her shift, and he looked nothing like the half-dead man she had pulled from the rocks. He was tall. He was composed. He was the kind of still that is not peace but discipline, the stillness of something that has learned to be dangerous without advertising it. "Nurse Adeyemi," he said. She stopped. "You shouldn't be walking. You had 14 stitches. I have had worse. That is not the reassurance you think it is." Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. The shadow of the idea of a smile, in the way that some people who have not smiled genuinely in a long time retain the muscle memory of it. "I came to thank you," Hajun Kwan said. "You don't have to," Mina said. "It's my job. Dragging a stranger off rocks at midnight is not your job. Keeping people alive is my job. The location is incidental." She looked at him steadily. "You should go home and rest. That wound needs." "Sit with me," he said. Not a request, exactly. Not quite a command. Something in between that she did not have a word for. "For 10 minutes. There is a place downstairs." She should have said no. She had a shift starting. She had 12 hours of other people's emergencies waiting for her. She was a practical woman who did not make room in her days for things she could not be certain of. She went downstairs with him. In the hospital cafe, over 2 cups of barley tea that she had chosen because caffeine was the last thing either of them needed, Hajun Kwan sat across from her and said very little for the first 4 minutes. He looked at her the way the older man had looked at her, with that quality of careful assessment. But underneath it was something else. Something she recognized from the bedside of patients who have recently been very close to a threshold they did not expect to find themselves near. A particular quality of attention. The attention of someone who has been reminded that the world is not guaranteed. "What were you doing on that beach?" he said finally. "I walk there after night shifts. It helps me decompress." She paused. What were you doing on those rocks? He was quiet for a moment. I was put there. She let that settle. She did not ask who had put him there. She could see, in the particular architecture of his stillness, that this was a sentence he had already decided was the only sentence he would give her on the subject. Your wound was dressed before I found you, she said instead. Someone helped you before the water. He looked at her with something sharper. You noticed that. It's my job to notice. He was quiet again. He looked at his tea. He looked like a man who had spent the last 4 days making peace with something and had not entirely succeeded. The man who dressed the wound, he said finally, did not survive the night I did. The weight of it dropped into the space between them, and neither of them moved. I'm sorry, Mina said. She said it the way she said it to families in the ward, not as a formality, but as a real thing, small and true. Ha-Jun Kwan looked at her. She had the sense that he was not accustomed to being offered real things. They sat for the full 10 minutes, and then she stood and said she had to start her shift. And she did, and she spent the next 12 hours in the cardiology ward and thought about him maybe 4 times, which she told herself was normal given the circumstances. He came back the next day, and the day after that. He came back 7 days in a row, at the start of her shift, always with barley tea. He had noticed she chose it over coffee, always with the quality of stillness that was not peace but discipline, always with the particular attention of a man who had decided to look at something carefully. He never stayed long. He never said anything that reached directly toward what was happening between them, because nothing was happening between them. She told herself, nothing was happening. She was a nurse, and he was a patient who had technically been discharged, and she was absolutely not counting the days. On the 7th day, he said, You have a quality I don't encounter. Which quality? You are not afraid of me. Mina looked at him. She thought about what she knew about his name, the weight of it in the air of this city, the conversations that lowered to whispers, the dockside neighborhoods gone quiet. She thought about the man in the corridor at 4 in the morning who had done a rapid calculation when he looked at her. She thought about the wound in Ha-Jun's side that had not come from any accident. Should I be? She said. Most people are. Most people don't find men on rocks at midnight, Mina said. After that, the threshold for what counts as frightening shifts a little. This time the almost smile went slightly further. She noticed. She noticed everything. She told herself, professionally observant. My name is Ha-Jun, he said. I know, she said. I'm Mina. I know, he said. And the way he said it told her he knew much more than her name, which should have frightened her and instead made her feel, with a clarity that alarmed her, seen. There are things Mina Adeyemi knew for certain. She was no longer entirely certain this was only one of them. The 8th day he did not come at the start of her shift. He came at the end. He was waiting outside the hospital in a black car, whose make she didn't know but whose silence she did. The silence of machinery that costs enough to insulate itself from the world. He rolled down the window when she came out. The December wind came off the sea and moved through her hair. Let me take you home, he said. I take the bus. I know. Let me take you home. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about her mother, who had a saying that went, The river does not warn you it is deep. She thought about her grandmother, who had a different saying that went, Sometimes the depth is the whole point. She got in the car. She would think about this moment later, in the months that followed when everything had been built and broken and the cost of it was tallying itself in the dark. She would think about the exact point at which a decision becomes a destiny. She would never be able to locate it more precisely than this. The cold December night, the black car, the way Busan's lights lay on the water of the harbor as they drove in silence that was not uncomfortable but layered, dense with everything neither of them had yet said. He dropped her at her building in Centum City. He did not ask to come up. He waited until she had reached the door before he drove away, which she noticed because she turned to look, which she noticed because she noticed everything, and because somewhere in her chest a certainty she could not name had just put down roots. When she was inside, with her back against her closed door and her coat still on, she called her best friend Kemi, who was back in Lagos working as a pharmacist and was the only person in the world Mina spoke to about things she could not be certain of, and she said, Kemi, something is happening. And Kemi, who knew Mina the way you know a person you have shared every version of yourself with, said, Something bad or something real? Mina thought about the barley tea, about the almost smile, about the man on the rocks who breathed deeper when she told him to stay. I think, she said, it might be both. The Kwan family learned about Ha-Jun's hospital visits on the 9th day. Mina did not know this yet. She would not know it for some time. But on the 9th day, in a glass tower above the Busan port that looked like a building and functioned like a throne room, a man named Kwon Daesung, Ha-jun's father, the current head of the Kwon dynasty in all its overlapping meanings, its legitimate shipping empire and its shadow economy, and the 3 generations of blood that had purchased both, sat at a table with 2 of his lieutenants and received a report. The report was brief. A Nigerian nurse, 29, working visa, for years in country. Busan Central Hospital, cardiology ward. Clean record. No significant connections. Found Ha-jun on Houndy Beach on the night of the incident, and is, according to surveillance, the reason Ha-jun survived. Kwon Daesung read the report. He folded it in half with the precise, deliberate gesture of a man who folds problems before he solves them. Then he asked one question. Is she a threat or a distraction? The lieutenant who answered was named Park Sung-woo, who had worked for the Kwon family for 19 years and knew better than most what the right answer looked like. At this point, he said carefully, a distraction. Monitor her, Kwon Daesung said. And then he moved on to other business, because he had a great deal of other business, and a Nigerian nurse in Centum City with barley tea and no significant connections was not yet worth more than one sentence. He was wrong, but he would not know that for some time. Mina went to work the next morning, and Ha-jun was at the end of her shift again, and this time she got in the car without being asked. They drove along the coast road with the sea on their left and Busan's winter light failing on their right, and he told her about the city. Not the parts in the guidebooks, but the parts that were his, the port neighborhoods where he had grown up watching containers move in the dark and understanding before he was old enough to say it that power lives in what is moved and who does the moving. She told him about Ibadan, about the specific quality of its noise, about her grandmother's courtyard where the mornings smelled like firewood and prayer, and the red earth of home that she carried in her body the way some people carry grief. She did not know she was going to tell him all of this. She told him all of this. He listened the way very few people listen, not waiting for his turn, but actually receiving. She noticed that too. She was running out of things to attribute to professional observation. They were sitting in the parked car outside her building when he said, very quietly, I have not spoken to anyone like this in a long time. Like what? Like there is nothing to protect in the conversation. He paused. Like the words are just words. Mina looked at him in the particular half-dark of a Busan winter evening, and what she thought was, this man has been surrounded by people who listen to him for what his words cost. She thought, he does not know what it feels like to be heard by someone who wants nothing from him. She thought, I am in so much trouble. She said good night, and went inside and stood again with her back to her door, and this time she did not call Kemi. She stood in her own silence and let the certainty that had put down roots in her chest grow one more inch, and she was frightened and awake, and more alive than she had felt in a very long time, and she thought about how her grandmother used to say, some things come to you wrapped in danger, and the danger is not a reason to turn away, it is a way of knowing the thing is real. She did not know yet what was moving in the glass tower above the Busan port. She did not know about the folded report, or about Park Sung-woo's careful answer, or about the word that Kwon Daesung had given his lieutenants to pass to the network of men who watched the things he wanted watched. She knew about the barley tea. She knew about the almost smile. She knew about the way Ha-jun Kwon had breathed deeper on the rocks when she told him to stay, and she knew, with the certainty she had built her life on, that she was not done telling him to. What she did not know, what she could not have known, standing in her apartment in Centum City with her coat still on and the Busan winter pressing against her windows, was that the night she pulled Ha-jun from the sea, she had not only saved his life. She had altered the trajectory of a war that had been building in the shadows of this city for 3 years. That the man who had put Ha-jun on those rocks was not done. That the wound in Ha-jun's side was not an ending but a message. That the Kwon dynasty, with its shipping empire and its shadow economy and its 3 generations of blood, was standing at the edge of something that would require every piece on its board, and that she had just, without knowing it, become one of them. The sea gives things back sometimes. It does not give them back unchanged, and it does not give them back free. January arrived and the cold deepened, and Mina stopped pretending. She stopped pretending at the precise moment Ha-jun showed up at her door on a Sunday morning. She had off with a bag from the market 3 neighborhoods away. The one that stocked African groceries. The one that was not obvious to find unless someone had gone looking. And inside the bag were augury and dried IRU, and a bunch of scent leaves that were not fresh, but were as close as you could get in Busan in January. And he held it out to her with the particular expression of a man who has done a thing he is not sure he will be allowed to have done. And Mina stood in her doorway and understood that this man had gone looking for her, for what she needed, without being asked. She let him in. She made a gusi soup, or the closest approximation she could manage in a Busan kitchen with Busan ingredients and the additions from the bag. He sat on a stool at her kitchen counter and watched with an attention that was not performative but genuine, asking questions she answered without ceremony, and the kitchen filled with a smell that turned her apartment, briefly and entirely, into something that lived in her body as home. She talked while she cooked because she always did, moving between English and Yoruba in the way she moved when she was comfortable, fluidly, without self-consciousness. At one point she said something to herself in Yoruba that made her laugh before she'd finished saying it, and he said, "What?" And she translated it, and he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, in the careful way of someone trying a word out, the Yoruba phrase back at her, mispronounced but earnest, and she laughed again, a different laugh this time, one she felt in her sternum. "Say it again," she said. He did. Worse. "No. Like this." She said it slowly. He repeated. "Better." She said it again, and he repeated, and somewhere in the third or fourth attempt they were leaning toward each other across the kitchen counter, without either of them having decided to move. They did not touch. Not then. They sat back and she served the soup, and he ate with the careful attention of someone tasting a thing they know is important. And he said it was the best thing he had eaten in years, and she said he was dramatic, and he said he was serious, and she looked at his face and believed him. After, they sat on her small balcony with blankets and the particular cold of Busan January, and he told her things. Not all things, not yet, but things, about a childhood that had been gilded and airless simultaneously, about a father whose love came pre-packaged with expectations that had the weight of chains, about the friend who had died dressing his wound on the rocks, whose name was Jaemin, and who had been with Hajun since they were 12 years old, running between the shipping containers of Gamcheon, making up rules for a world that had not consulted them about its actual rules. He did not cry. She did not think he had cried in a very long time. But he held himself very still while he spoke about Jaemin, with the stillness of a man keeping something in through sheer force, and Mina sat next to him under the Busan winter sky and did not offer him platitudes. She offered him presence, which was what her grandmother had taught her was the only real offering. He was the only person, Hajun said, who was not afraid of me and also not performing fearlessness. Mina understood. She understood it in her bones. My mother was like that, she said. Before she passed, she was the only person I could be completely still with. He looked at her. When? 3 years ago. Heart failure. I was here when it happened, which is, she paused. I was here. He was quiet for a while. Is that why you became a heart nurse? She had never connected those two things aloud to anyone. She sat with the question for a moment. Maybe, she said. Or maybe it's that the heart is the most honest thing in the body. It doesn't negotiate. It just beats or it doesn't. Hajun Kwan looked at her for a long time with the particular look she was coming to know. The look of a man encountering something he did not have a category for. You are unlike anyone I have ever known, he said. I'm aware, she said, and he laughed, which was a real laugh, a full one, and it rearranged his whole face, and she had to look away from it because looking directly at it felt like looking at something she was not supposed to want. He started coming twice a week, then 3 times. The hospital visits had been replaced by this. Sundays in her apartment, Wednesday evenings on the coast road, or in the small Gamcheon cafe where the owner knew him and brought things without being asked. Saturday afternoons in the fish market at Jigalki, where she had learned to barter with a ferocity that delighted him. They spoke in a mixture of Korean and English, with occasional incursions of Yoruba on her part when she was feeling something she didn't yet want to be precise about. He was learning. He remembered everything she taught him. She was also, she realized, learning, not the language but the vocabulary of him, the way his jaw tightened when he was restraining something, the particular quality of his silences, the things that lived behind his eyes in the moments before his discipline reasserted itself. She did not ask about his work. He did not offer. This was a mutual and unspoken treaty whose terms were clear. They were building something in a protected space, and the world outside it was bracketed. She knew what she knew about his name and his family, about the shipping empire and the shadow beneath it, and she chose not to examine it in this space. This was not naivety. She was not naive. It was a deliberate choice to let something grow before testing the weight of the ground it was growing in. She was aware this could not last. It lasted 2 months. In those 2 months, Ha-Jun Kwon became the first man in 4 years to make Mina feel like Busan was not a posting but a life. She had come here on a fellowship, extended her visa twice, made peace with the quality of solitude that came with being foreign in a city that was not unfriendly but was not precisely for her. She had friends at the hospital, colleagues who invited her to things, a handful of people she trusted enough to call. But the particular warmth of being known, of being seen not as the Nigerian nurse with the excellent clinical instincts and the good laugh, but as Mina, as a whole and specific person with a courtyard in Ibadan in her body and Yoruba in her reflexes, and a grief she had been carrying at a manageable distance for 3 years, that she had not had. Ha-Jun gave her that without knowing he was giving it. He gave it in the market bag with the IRU and the scent leaves. He gave it in the way he listened when she spoke about her mother. He gave it in the Yoruba phrases he practiced in the car, never perfectly, always earnestly, that she corrected with a patience she did not know she possessed until she needed it. He was also, she understood with a clarity that she allowed herself in the honest hours of early morning, a man whose hands were not clean. She had 14 stitches and a dead friend named Jamin as evidence. She had the name Kwon and everything it carried in the air of this city as evidence. She was a woman who had spent years keeping people alive, and she knew the difference between someone who had only ever received violence and someone who had also delivered it. She was not foolish enough to believe that the man who brought her market bags and learned her language had only ever been gentle. She held both of these things. She did not resolve them. She held them, the way her grandmother had said. Sometimes you carry the whole truth in both hands without putting either part down. Then Ha-Jun took her to Gamcheon. It was a Saturday in late February, the cold breaking slightly at the edges, and he drove her up into the hillside neighborhood that tumbled down toward the harbor in bright painted terraces. The artist's village, the tourists called it, but Ha-Jun called it something else. He called it where I am from. He parked on a narrow street, and they walked, and he showed her with the quiet pride of someone showing a thing that costs them something to show. The building where he had grown up, before his father's empire, had relocated the family to the glass tower above the port. The steep alleys where he and Jamin had played games governed entirely by rules they invented. The grandmother of a neighbor who, upon seeing Ha-Jun, grabbed his face in her hands with the territorial affection of the very old and said something that made him dip his head. "She says you look like someone who has finally come back," Mina said, because she had heard the Korean and understood it. He looked at her with something so unguarded, she almost looked away. Almost. They ate at a pojangmaka, a street stall run by a woman named Haenyo Jong, who had apparently fed Ha-Jun through the particular hungers of adolescence, and who upon meeting Mina subjected her to a 15-minute interrogation in Korean that Ha-Jun translated selectively and with great diplomatic editing until Mina, catching enough to know what was actually being asked, answered the question directly in Korean, which made Haenyo Jong bang the table and declare something. "What did she say?" Mina asked. "She says," Ha-Jun said carefully, "that you have the eyes of a woman who knows how to hold a man's wildness without flinching." Mina looked at Haenyo Jong, who was watching her with the satisfaction of someone who has just said the correct thing out loud. Then she looked at Ha-Jun, who was not quite looking at her, whose jaw had the particular quality of tightness she had learned to read. She picked up her bowl and ate, and the seafood stew was the best thing she had tasted in Busan, and she said so, and Haenyo Jong banged the table again. On the way back down the hill, Ha-Jun took her hand. It was not dramatic. It was the simplest possible gesture. His hand finding hers as they came down a steep step, steadying her, and then not letting go. They walked down the hill in the late afternoon winter light with their hands connected, and neither of them said anything about it, and she felt it in her sternum like a second heartbeat. At the car, they stopped, and he turned to look at her, and in his face was everything the discipline had been holding back. All the weeks of barley tea and almost smiles and Yoruba practice and Sunday soup and Saturday markets. All of it present in the way he looked at her, as if she were the most difficult and necessary thing he had encountered in his entire life. "Mina," he said. "I know," she said. "This is. I know." He looked at her for a long moment. "I don't know how to do this without it costing you something," he said. "Everything around me has a cost. I have never," he stopped. Started again. I have never wanted someone out of the danger before. I'm not asking to be outside anything, she said. I'm asking to be seen. He looked at her like the answer physically moved through him. He kissed her on the hill above Gamchin with the harbor below them and the last of the winter sun going out and Busan spread around them in all its layered, complex, dangerous beauty, and it was exactly as inevitable as she had known it would be and nothing like she'd been prepared for. She was not prepared for the way he kissed her like a question that had been asking itself for months and was only now allowed an answer. She was not prepared for the feeling of his hands on her face, careful and deliberate as everything he did, or for the way she felt herself step into it completely, no hesitation, no halfness, entirely herself in her body in this moment, in this city she had chosen and was now choosing again for a different reason. When they separated, the harbor lights were coming on below them. Busan at dusk. The sea that had given him back. I need to tell you things, he said. About who I am. What I am. I know who you are, Mina said. You know parts. Then tell me the rest. He looked at the harbor for a moment. She waited. She was good at waiting. The night I was put on those rocks, he said, it was a man named Shin Jae-won. He runs the Eastern Port operations. Or he did, before my father's family owned that territory. He wants it back. He has wanted it back for 3 years. The attack on me was not the beginning. He paused. It will not be the end. Are you safe now? He looked at her. Define safe. Are you going to end up on rocks again? I am taking measures. That is also not the reassurance you think it is. The almost smile came back, now a real one, now a thing he had apparently decided to stop containing. No, he said. Probably not. They stayed on the hill until the cold made staying impractical. On the drive back he told her the architecture of his world in outline. Not everything, not the details that would have been genuinely dangerous to share, but the shape of it. His father's empire. The Kwan family's legitimacy, the export company on paper, and the dockside operations beneath the paper. His own role, which was not his father's second in command. They were not built for that arrangement. But something lateral, the part that required the particular quality of stillness that was not peace but discipline, the part that made men in dark suits run calculations when they looked at her at 4 a.m. She listened. She asked the questions that needed asking. She did not pretend it was not what it was. If you want to walk away, he said, this is the moment. Before it becomes more complicated. She thought about her grandmother's courtyard, about the smell of scent leaves in her Busan kitchen, about the hill above Gamchin and the harbor below and his hands on her face. Ha-jun, she said, I pulled you off rocks. We are already well past the moment. He was quiet for the rest of the drive, but he held her hand across the gearshift the entire way home, and she could feel, through the warmth of his palm, that something had shifted in him, some weight redistributed, something set down. She did not know if she had made the right decision. She knew it was a real one. She held it in both hands. What she did not know, could not see from where she sat in the warmth of that car with the Busan lights streaming past, was that 3 blocks away from her apartment building in Centum City, a man in a dark sedan was noting the time and the route and the particular joined quality of their hands across the gearshift. The report he filed the next morning went not to Park Sung-woo, who worked for the Kwan family. It went to Shin Jae-won's organization. And Shin Jae-won, who had spent 3 years methodically mapping every leverage point available against the Kwan family and its heir, read the report with the careful attention of a man who has just found a door he did not know was there. Not a threat, not a distraction, an entry point. The call came on a Tuesday. Mina had just finished afternoon rounds and was in the break room peeling an orange when her phone lit up with a number she did not recognize. She almost did not answer. She answered. The voice on the other end was male, Korean, and perfectly calm in the way that perfectly calm voices never actually are. Nurse Adeyemi. My name is not important. I would like you to stop seeing Ha-jun Kwan. She finished peeling her orange. Who is this? Someone who knows how a working visa works in this country, and how it can stop working. She sat with that for 2 seconds. She was a practical woman. She understood what was being said. What do you want? I told you what I want. You want me to stop seeing him. I want you to understand what you are standing next to. What the consequences are for anyone who stands there. If you wanted to frighten me, Mina said, you should have called when I was alone in the dark somewhere. I'm eating an orange in a hospital break room in the middle of Tuesday. This is not a frightening moment. A pause. Then, The next one will be. The line went dead. She sat in the break room for 3 minutes with the orange in her hands and her thoughts organized into the clear, sequential order of someone who had been trained to function in emergencies. She did not panic. She thought. She called Ha-jun. He answered on the first ring, which told her he had been waiting for something. "Someone called me," she said, telling me to stop. The silence on the other end was not empty. It was full of something she could hear him holding down. When he spoke, his voice was the stillest she had ever heard it, which meant it was the most dangerous. "Are you at the hospital?" "Yes." "Stay there." "I'm coming." "Ha-jun." "Mina. Please." She stayed. He arrived in 20 minutes, and she had never seen him move the way he moved when he came through the hospital entrance. Not the controlled stillness she knew, but something underneath it. The thing the stillness was built to cover, and it was focused entirely on her, on the specific location of her body in space, on the question of whether she was intact. He took her hands when he reached her. He looked at her face. He seemed to be taking inventory. "I'm fine," she said. "I should not have." He stopped. Started again. "I told myself I was being careful. I was not careful enough." "Who was it?" "Shin Jae-won's people." She nodded. "The name from Gamcheon Hill. The man who had put him on the rocks." "What does he want?" "He wants me destabilized. He's been working toward a move on the Eastern Port operations for 3 years, and he needs my father and me." He stopped again. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen before, something stripped of its usual architecture. "He knows you matter to me. He will use that." The word matter between them. Hanging there. She felt it land. "I'm not going to tell you to let me go," she said. "So don't ask me to." He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they were a different kind of steady. "I'm going to put security on you. Ha-jun. It will be discreet. You won't." "I'm not objecting to the security," she said. "I'm objecting to you looking at me like this is already something that's happened. It hasn't. I'm here." He looked at her. In his face was everything. The gratitude and the terror and the particular anguish of a man who has spent his entire life knowing that the things he touches acquire a price tag from the world. "You don't know what he's capable of," he said. "I know what you're capable of," she said. "I'm not worried." "You should be." "Ha-jun, I have kept people alive in emergencies with 2 fingers and my full concentration. I have been in this city for 4 years with none of the armor you're wearing. I am not made of porcelain." She held his gaze. "But I also know when to listen to someone who knows the terrain better than I do. So tell me what I need to know. And then let's handle it." Something in him settled, not resolved, but settled. He told her. He told her more than he had told her on the drive from Gamcheon, more of the specific architecture of the danger. About Shin Jae-won's organization, about the 3-year campaign, about the fact that Jaemin had died not just as collateral damage, but as a deliberate message. That Shin knew how to find the things Ha-jun could not afford to lose. She listened. She asked the questions that needed asking. She let the weight of it be as heavy as it was. Then she said, "Okay, what's the plan?" He stared at her for a moment. Then, quietly, "You are extraordinary." "I am practical," she said. "Which is close." They made a plan. Security detail, 2 people, rotational, who she met briefly, and who she assessed with the efficiency of a woman who has spent years reading whether people intend to help or harm, and who she decided she could live with. A changed route to work. A temporary stop to the public-facing parts of their time together. No more Jigalki Market on Saturdays, no more Coast Road walks. This last part she did not love. She understood it was necessary. What neither of them planned for was Kwon Dae-sung. Ha-jun's father called him that same evening. Mina was not on the call, but she learned its contents later, by degrees, from Ha-jun's face and his words and the specific quality of the silence that opened between them in the following days. The call had been brief. Its contents were not complex. Kwon Dae-sung had said, "End it." He had not said it because of Shin Jae-won. He had said it because of who Mina was. Not her character, not her history, not the 14 stitches on his son's side that would not have healed correctly without her. But who she was in the categories that mattered to a man who thought in dynasties. Foreign. Not Korean. Not from a family that could be absorbed into the Kwon bloodline without consequence to the bloodline's internal logic. The kind of woman you did not take to the family table. The kind of woman the world the Kwon family had built had no room for, because it had never built room for her. Ha-jun did not end it. The silence that opened between them in the following days was not between Mina and Ha-jun. It was inside Ha-jun, in the space between what his father had commanded and what he had chosen, and she could feel him standing in it every time she looked at him. She did not push. She let him stand there, and she kept her hands available when he needed them, and she went to work in the mornings with 2 security personnel who dressed like ordinary people and followed at a careful distance, and whom she brought coffee from the hospital cafe because she was a practical woman and they were doing a job. The tension lasted 10 days. Then the world stopped managing itself quietly. The attack happened not on Mina, but on her hospital. It was targeted and surgical, not violence, but something more elegant and more frightening. A complaint was filed with the hospital administration about a nurse in the cardiology ward who had allegedly administered incorrect medication to a patient 3 months prior. The complaint was detailed, technically plausible, signed by a name Mina did not recognize. The medication in question was a real one she handled regularly. The patient was a real patient, one she remembered, one she had cared for correctly and whose file would show as much. But investigations took time, and during investigations people were placed on administrative leave, and during administrative leave working visas entered a particular gray zone of vulnerability. She found out when her supervisor called her into the office. She sat in that office with the particular stillness she had borrowed from Hajun, the stillness that is not peace but discipline, and listened to her supervisor, who was uncomfortable and apologetic, and who said all the right things about the process being a formality and the investigation likely being resolved quickly. Mina heard everything and said the appropriate responses, and did not show anything. Not there. She showed it to Hajun. Not tears. She was not a woman who cried in front of people as a first response. What she showed him was controlled, focused, specific anger. The kind of anger that burns cleanly, without waste, without theatrics. She sat across from him in the Wednesday evening cafe, and she said, "He filed a false complaint against me. He is threatening my license and my visa." Hajun's stillness went absolute. "How long have you known?" 2 hours. "You should have called me immediately." "I'm calling you now." He was quiet for a moment in the way that was not peace. "This is my fault." "It is Shin Jae-won's fault," she said precisely. "Do not take ownership of his actions." He looked at her. "Mina." "No," she said, and it came out with a firmness that was entirely her mother's, entirely Abaddon, entirely the woman she had been before she'd ever heard of Hajun Kwan. "You do not get to fold into guilt right now. I need you functional. What can you do about this complaint?" He could do something. He did it quickly. The Kwan family, whatever its sins, had extensive legal resources and extensive knowledge of how paperwork could be made to tell different stories under the right pressure. And by the following morning the filing had been met with a counterfiling so complete and so surgically documented that the investigation dissolved before it had formally opened. Mina's supervisor called her with relief, so genuine it was almost funny. She was not entirely relieved. Because when the filing was withdrawn, she sat in her apartment and looked at the walls and thought for the first time, really thought, about what it meant to be here. In this city. In this story. She was 4 years from home, on a visa, working a job she had built with years of careful study, and she had just watched how quickly all of it could become a weapon in someone else's war. She had pulled a man from the sea. She had made soup in her kitchen and learned the shape of his silences and stood on a hill above Gamchin and chosen. She had chosen, with full information, eyes open. She still chose. But the fear was real now, in a way it had not been before. Not fear of Hajun, fear of the world wrapped around him. She called Kemi that night. She told her everything. There was a long silence on the line from Lagos. Then Kemi said, "Mina, come home. I'm not running. I'm not saying run. I'm saying, what is the actual goal here? For you. Not for him." She thought about it. She thought about it seriously, which Kemi deserved and which the question deserved. "The goal," she said finally, "is to not lose what I've found here. Not the visa, not the job, not him. Not any of it. And if you have to choose." She didn't answer. She didn't have an answer. She sat in the silence, and Kemi sat in it with her across the ocean, and neither of them said the thing they were both thinking, which was that in every war between two families, the people caught between them are not the victors. 3 days later, Hajun came to her apartment, and he was different. Not worse, sharper. Clarified. He stood in her living room, and he told her he had made a decision. "I'm moving against Shin Jae-won," he said. "Not my father's way. My way. I'm ending this." "What does that mean?" He told her what it meant. She listened. It was not a clean plan. It was not a plan that kept all its hands empty. She understood what she was listening to, and she did not look away from it. "And your father?" she said. He met her eyes. "I am choosing what I am choosing." She understood. In his face was the thing she had seen on the hill above Gamchin. Unguarded, present, decided. He had stood in the silence between his father's command and his own choice, and he had walked out of it in a direction. "How long?" she said. 2 weeks. Maybe 3. "What do you need from me?" He crossed the room and took her face in his hands, the same careful and deliberate gesture as always, and he looked at her with everything he had, all of it uncovered. "Stay," he said. She thought about a beach at midnight, about the thread-thin pulse under her fingers, about telling a stranger in the dark that he was not going to die, that she did not have time for that. "Stay," she said back to him. A different meaning, the same certainty. The 2 weeks that followed were the most frightened Mina had ever been, in a quiet, sustained way that was harder to manage than acute emergencies. Ha-Jun moved against Shin Jae-won on 3 fronts simultaneously: financial, legal, and through channels she deliberately did not ask about. She went to work. She came home. She cooked. She called Kemi. She carried the fear the way her grandmother had told her to carry heavy things. Close to the center of yourself, not out at the ends of your arms, because things held at the ends of your arms tire you faster. On the 14th night, her phone rang at 2 in the morning. Ha-Jun's number. "It's done," he said. She sat up in the dark. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Everyone with you?" "Yes." She breathed. One full breath, consciously taken, the way she breathed in the middle of a code when she needed to be steady. "Okay," she said. "Okay." "Mina." His voice had a quality she had not heard before. Something scraped down to the bone. "I need to see you." "Come," she said. He was there in 20 minutes. He looked like a man who had been somewhere that is hard to come back from, and she opened her door and let him in and made tea, and they sat on her couch without the lamp on, just the glow of Busan through the windows, and he told her what he could, and she received it without flinching, and they sat together in the dark until both of them were steady. She did not know yet what it had cost. She knew it was not over. The thing with Shin Jae-won might be done, but the thing with Kwon Dae-sung was not, and the thing with the world Ha-Jun had been built inside of was most certainly not, and she was a practical woman who held things in both hands, and she held this. She held it and she held him, and outside the windows Busan lay against the winter dark, and the sea moved and moved the way it always does, indifferent and patient, already composing the next thing it intended to give back. Spring came to Busan with the peculiar tenderness of a season that has kept you waiting long enough. The cherry blossoms along the Onchinkian stream went from promise to excess in the span of a week, and the harbor lost its gray and went blue-green, and the city that had spent 3 months being cold and personal was suddenly open, generous, salt-warm. Mina walked to work some mornings through the blossom-lit streets and felt the city forgive her for having doubted it. Things had shifted. Shin Jae-won was no longer a functioning threat. The details of his collapse she did not have and did not request, but the collapse was real, confirmed by the absence of dark sedans and threatening phone calls and the particular atmospheric pressure of being watched. Ha-Jun moved through the world differently, not without vigilance, but without the specific tension of someone managing an active crisis. He smiled more. Not often. He was still a man built on discipline and silence, but more and more fully, and she had begun to understand his smiles as the precise and precious things they were. She met Park Sung-woo for coffee in March. Ha-Jun arranged it, which she understood was an act of intention. Park was his father's man, and bringing her into that adjacency was not casual. Park was formal and careful and somewhat disconcerted by her, which she found privately entertaining. She was pleasant and direct, and by the end of the hour she understood that Park respected her in the way that extremely cautious men respect things that have proven resistant to harm. It was not warmth. It was something more useful. Kwon Dae-sung was a different matter. Ha-Jun told her his father wanted to meet. He said it carefully, watching her face. She said yes. He looked at her for a moment, the unguarded look, the one she had come to know as the one that meant he was going to say something true. "You don't have to," he said. "I know," she said. "I want to." She prepared. She was a woman who prepared. She had not gotten 4 years on a working visa in a country whose language was not her birth language by failing to prepare. She learned what she could about Kwon Dae-sung, confirmed what she had pieced together from Ha-Jun's careful disclosures over months. She chose what she wore with intention. Not the dress that would tell him she was trying to impress him, but the kind of clothes that said I know who I am, and I did not dress for you. She asked Ha-jun if she should know anything in advance, and he said, he will try to read you in the first 2 minutes. Don't let him think he has. How will I know if he thinks he has? He'll become pleasant. She filed this. The meeting was at the glass tower above the port. She had not been inside before, and she noted its architecture. The specific message of a building designed to make you feel the distance between yourself and the man at its top. She was not unaffected. She was also unimpressed, which was different. Kwon Daesung was smaller than she had expected, which was a consistent experience with very powerful men. He was perhaps 65, immaculate, with the kind of face that had been handsome and was now merely authoritative, and eyes that were doing exactly what Ha-jun had said they would do in the first 2 minutes. She met them steadily. They spoke in Korean, with Ha-jun present, but not intervening. Kwon Daesung was formal and perfectly calibrated. Not hostile, not warm, operating at the precise temperature of a man conducting an assessment. He asked about her work, her family, her history in Korea. She answered. She did not perform humility. She did not perform anything. At a certain point he said, in Korean, "My son is not an ordinary man." "I know," she said. "The life around him is not ordinary." "I know." He studied her. "What do you want from him?" She looked at him for a moment. She thought about what she could say, the safe answers, the strategic answers. She chose neither. "I want to be the person he can speak to like the words are just words," she said. "I want to see him without armor. I want him to know what it feels like to be received by someone who wants nothing from him but his actual self." She paused. "I think you know he hasn't had that." Something moved across Kwon Daesung's face. Barely. But it moved. "And in return," he said, "nothing. That is not how it works." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with the fraction of softening that Ha-jun had told her to watch for as a sign of something preceding, "You are not what I expected." "I know," she said again. It was not acceptance. It was not even approval. But something shifted in the room in a way she could feel, some withdrawal of active resistance, some tentative revision of the calculation. Ha-jun drove her home afterward and was very quiet, and she let him be. And when they stopped outside her building, he turned to look at her, and she could see he was trying to find the right words and wasn't finding them. "Mina." "I know," she said, for the last time that day. He pulled her to him and held her with the kind of full-body attention of a man who has decided to stop managing the measure of things, and she held him back and thought, this is the real one. This is the thing her grandmother's saying was about. This is the depth that was the whole point. April arrived, and with it, the thing she had not planned for. She received a letter from the hospital in Ibadan. Not her hospital, but the teaching hospital where she had done her training, where her mother had been in her final months, where a man named Dr. Oyeleran had once told her she was the most naturally gifted student he had taught in 30 years. The letter offered her a position. Senior Nursing Officer, Cardiology, renewable annually, with a funded research component on cardiac care in under-resourced settings. It was the kind of opportunity that, at 25, she had dreamed about and at 29 had stopped actively hoping for. It was Ibadan. It was home. It was her mother's city and her grandmother's courtyard and the red earth she carried in her body. She held the letter for 3 days before she told Ha-jun. When she told him, they were on her balcony, which was where important things had always happened between them, and the spring evening was warm enough that they had blankets but didn't need them, and she told him plainly, as she told him everything. She gave him all of it, the letter, the opportunity, what it meant, how it lived in her. He was very still while she spoke. The disciplined stillness. She watched him hold it. "When would you need to decide?" he said. "They've given me 6 weeks. And what are you thinking?" She looked at the harbor, at the lights on the water, at the city she had chosen and rechosen. "I'm thinking," she said carefully, "that I don't know how to weigh one life against another. The life I could have there. The life I have here." She looked at him. "I'm thinking I am asking you what you think." He was quiet for a long time. She did not rush him. "If I told you to stay," he said finally, "I would mean it more than almost anything I have ever meant. But I would know, and you would know, that I said it knowing what it costs you." He paused. "If I told you to go, I would be telling the truth about what I want for you. Not about what I want." She nodded slowly. She had known he would say something like this. She had known it, and it still cost her something to hear it. "Is there a version," she said, Where it doesn't have to be one? He looked at her. She could see him working it, not hoping, not indulging, but actually thinking, the way he thought about everything with the full weight of his attention. Ibadan is not soul, he said. My world is, the reach of what my family is connected to extends, but not easily, not without cost. A long-distance arrangement would mean, he stopped. It would mean asking you to wait through things I cannot fully predict. Asking you to love a man who is in a world that does not let him simply board planes. I know that world, she said. I know you know it. I'm telling you the cost of staying in it at a distance. She thought about Kemi's question. What is the actual goal for you, not for him? She thought about her mother's city. She thought about the teaching hospital and Dr. Oyeleran and 30 years of expertise she could learn from. She thought about her grandmother's courtyard and the red earth. She thought about the hill above Gamchin and the harbor below and the way he had kissed her like a question. She thought about the man on the rocks, about a thread-thin pulse, about telling him to stay because she did not have time for him to not. She was crying. She had not registered it happening. She was a woman who cried quietly and without drama, and she was doing exactly that. Tears moving down her face in the warm April dark, and Hajun watching her with an expression she would carry in her body for the rest of her life. I'm going to take the position, she said. He nodded. One nod. Contained. His jaw the particular tightness of something being held in through sheer force. Hajun. I know, he said. His voice was steady. She could hear, underneath the steadiness, everything it was covering. It's the right thing. It is the right thing for you, and he stopped. He looked at the harbor. He was quiet for a moment that was long and alive. Then, I am glad I did not die on those rocks. She made a sound that was something between a laugh and the opposite of one. And I am glad, he said, precisely and directly and with the full weight of everything they had built across these months, that you were the one who found me, that it was you. He looked at her. Whatever comes after, whatever I have to do without you in it, it was you. It will always have been you. She crossed the small space between them and held his face in her hands this time, reversing the gesture that had always been his, and she looked at him the way she looked at things she intended to keep forever, even the ones she had to let go. Come visit, she said. I will. I mean it. I know you mean it. And I'm not disappearing. We're both still in the world. He put his hands over hers, still on his face. I know, he said. It's enough. It has to be enough. She did not argue. She let it be enough for this moment, which was all any moment could ever ask of itself. She left on a Saturday morning in May. He drove her to Gimhe Airport. They did not perform a farewell. No speeches, no elegant goodbyes. He carried one of her bags to the check-in area and stood with her while she processed her luggage, and then turned to face her in the busy morning terminal with Busan all around them and the particular public blankness of airports that strips everything down to essentials. She looked at him. He looked at her. Everything they had said and not said was present in the looking. Hajun, she said. Thank you for the market bag. He blinked. Then, for the third time in all the months she had known him, he smiled, a full smile, the one that rearranged his whole face and that she had to look toward and not away from, and he said, Thank you for the soup. She laughed. He did too. And then she hugged him. One long, full-body hug in the middle of the terminal, her face against his chest, his chin against the top of her head, both of them holding for exactly as long as was real. And then she stepped back and picked up her carry-on and walked toward the gate without looking back because she was a practical woman and looking back would have ended her. She did not know, as she walked, that 6 hours earlier, Park Sung-woo had found Hajun in his office at the glass tower above the port with a report. The report concerned the residual network of Shin Jae-won's organization, not the main operation, which was genuinely collapsed, but a peripheral cell that had decided, in the absence of clear leadership, to prove its autonomy in the way peripheral cells proved things. The report said the cell had, in the preceding 72 hours, identified a target. The target was the Nigerian nurse. The logic was simple. Shin Jae-won had understood Mina as leverage before he fell. The remnant of his organization, looking for something to do with its unspent anger, had arrived at the same calculation. Hajun had read the report. He had made some calls. He had given some instructions. Then he had driven to the airport. Mina did not know any of this. She found out 3 weeks later in Ibadan, when she was settling into her new apartment in Bodija, surrounded by boxes and the smell of home and the particular Ibadan morning that had lived in her body as a reference point through 4 years of Korean winters. She was unpacking her kitchen when her phone rang. "Hajun." She answered immediately. "Hajun, I need you to listen," he said. His voice was careful. Arranged. She had learned to read the arrangements of his voice the way she read pulses. She stopped unpacking. She sat down on the floor of her kitchen in Ibadan. "Tell me." "The situation is resolved," he said. "You are safe. It will not come up again." She understood what he was telling her. She understood it in the gaps, the things he was not saying, the careful arrangement of the words he was using. "Are you all right?" she said. A pause that lasted too long. "Hajun." Her voice dropped to the register she used in the ward when she needed someone to be honest with her. "Are you all right?" "There was a complication," he said. She closed her eyes. She was a cardiac nurse. She knew about complications. He told her, in the careful way he told her things. Not everything, not the details that would have been genuinely dangerous, but the shape of it. He had been in a confrontation. He was at a hospital. The wound was not the same place as before. She stood up from the floor. "I'm coming back. Mina, I am coming back. You are not going to give up Abaddon." "I am not giving up anything," she said, precise and clear and entirely certain in the way she was always certain when it mattered. "I am going to come and sit next to you and tell you that you are not going to die. And then I am going to come home again. Those two things are not in conflict." She paused. "Hajun, you told me you were glad you did not die on those rocks. I need you to stay glad." A silence. In it she could hear him, somewhere in a hospital room on the other side of the world, holding something in through sheer force. "Mina," he said. His voice had come down to its real register, below all the arrangements, to the thing underneath. "You are 6,000 kilometers away, and you are still the only place I am not alone." She sat back down on her kitchen floor in Ibadan. She put her back against the cabinet. She let herself be fully present in the weight of him across the ocean. "I know," she said. "I know. I'm here." She did not go back. Not that week, not because she chose the position over him, but because Hajun told her, insisted, with a conviction she recognized as real because she knew him now, knew when he was performing something and when he meant it, that he was going to be fine, that the wound was serious but not fatal, that she was not allowed to cancel the first month of the best professional opportunity of her life for a man who had by his own assessment survived worse. She stayed in Ibadan, and she called him every day and sometimes twice, and she learned his new rooms, sounds the way she had learned the sounds of her hospital wards, the specific quality of the silences, where the pain was in them, where the ordinary was. She sent him things in a box, small, absurd, specific things, a small container of IRU she had found in the Bodija market, a postcard of Ibadan's skyline, a recording of herself speaking Yoruba that he could listen to, she wrote, when the silence got too big. He called her at 2 in the morning one night, which was 9 in the morning for her, and she was already at the hospital, but she stepped into a quiet corridor and answered. "I listened to the recording," he said. "Which part?" "All of it. 3 times. She smiled at the wall of the corridor. "You are terrible at recovering," she said. "You're supposed to sleep." "I know." A pause. "Mina, when I am well enough." "Yes," she said before he had finished. A silence. Then, "You don't know what I was going to say. You were going to ask something that the answer to is yes," she said. "So yes." She could hear him breathe. She counted the breaths the way she counted them in the ward, assessing, present, attentive. He breathed 3 times, and she heard in the third one that he was crying, quietly and without drama, the way she cried, and she stood in the corridor of a teaching hospital in Ibadan and held the phone to her ear and said nothing, just present. "Just here. I'll visit," she said finally. "In 6 weeks. When you are properly healed and not before, because I will check the notes and I will know if you've discharged yourself early, and if you have I will be very annoyed." He laughed. It was not the full one that rearranged his face, but it was real, and she heard it, and she filed it next to all the other things she would carry. 6 weeks later she flew back to Busan. She flew back and she was there for 7 days, and they were not dramatic days. They were quiet ones, ordinary ones, the kind of days that are only ordinary because the extraordinary has been absorbed into the fabric of normal life. She made soup in the kitchen of his apartment, which was larger than hers had been and overlooked the harbor. He sat on a stool at the counter and asked questions and mispronounced Yoruba, and she corrected him with the patience she had not known she possessed until she needed it. They walked along the Houndy Beach Road, slowly because of his healing ribs, and the sea moved beside them in its indifferent and patient way. They sat on the balcony at night with the Busan lights on the water below. On the last night she was there, they were on the balcony, and he was quiet in the particular way that meant something real was coming, and she waited, and he said, "I want to come to Abadan." She looked at him. "When? When I can move properly. 3 months, maybe 4. To visit. To see it. To see where you are from." A pause. "To meet your grandmother." She was quiet for a moment. She thought about her grandmother's courtyard, about the morning smell of firewood and prayer, about a woman who said, "Some things come to you wrapped in danger, and the danger is not a reason to turn away, it is a way of knowing the thing is real." "She will interrogate you," Mina said. "At length. In Yoruba. I've been practicing." She laughed. "The sternal one, the real one. Hajun, you can barely say good morning." "I can say good morning perfectly," he said, with the particular dignity of a man who is absolutely incorrect about this. He demonstrated. She nearly fell off the balcony. They sat in the laughing until the night had settled around them, warm and salt-bright, and Busan was simply itself below. Just a city, just a harbor, just the sea that had given things back and taken things in return, that had been both generous and honest about its nature, that did not apologize for being deep. She thought about what it cost. She thought about it honestly, in the full accounting. Jae-min, who had dressed a wound and died for it. The scar on Ha-jun's side, and the new one. The nights in the administrative leave gray zone. The phone call with the visa threat. The things held in both hands, one in each, neither put down. The 6,000 kilometers. The 2 in the morning calls. The box of IRU and postcards and recordings. The position in Abadan she had not sacrificed. The man in Busan she had not abandoned. She thought about what it was worth. She thought about that too. "Hajun," she said. I'm glad I walked on that beach." He was quiet for a moment. Then, with the full honesty of a man who has learned to speak below his own arrangements. "I know. I am not, frequently, glad of things. I am glad of that." She reached across and took his hand. He turned it over and held hers the way you hold something you intend to keep. Not tightly, not possessively, but deliberately, with full knowledge of its weight. They sat like that for a long time, above Busan, above the harbor, above the sea that did not ask permission and did not explain itself, that moved in its patient, indifferent way, composing and revising and composing again, always with something to give back. Not unchanged, not free, but real, always real. There are things Mina Adeyemi knows for certain. She knows the smell of rain before it falls on the Busan coast. She knows how to read a pulse with 2 fingers and know without looking at a machine whether a stranger intends to live. She knows the exact moment a decision becomes a destiny, and she knows it cannot always be located more precisely than the feeling of a car door opening, a hand held on a hill, a recording listened to 3 times at 2 in the morning 6,000 kilometers away. She knows that love, when it is real, does not simplify. It does not make the world smaller or safer or more manageable. It makes the world exactly what it is, enormous and layered and costly and worth it, and it gives you someone to carry the weight with, not instead of you, but beside you, in the ongoing and imperfect and necessary act of staying. She knows that staying is a choice made not once but continuously, every day, in the ordinary morning of a teaching hospital in Abadan, and in the quiet of a Busan balcony above the harbor, and in the 2 in the morning phone calls that are also a way of saying, "I am here. I am still here. I have not gone." And she knows this, above all, that on a cold December night on a Houndy beach, she found a man on the rocks who was breathing too slowly and whose pulse was thin as thread, and she pressed her fingers to his wrist and she told him to stay, not because she knew what he was or what it would cost, but because staying was something she believed in. He stayed. So did she. That is the whole story. That is the price of it and the worth of it together, held in both hands, neither one put down.
Hello, bestie. I hope you enjoyed this story. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the bell button so that you get notified when we upload a new video. I catch you in the next video. We love you.